Okay, so you send over the cybersecurity report, and to be honest, my first thought was, well, this is a bit worrying. Imagine like you're driving home, low on gas, pull into the nearest station, totally clueless that their payment system is about to be like held hostage by hackers.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but that hits a little too close to home for me.
It's a scenario that unfortunately is becoming increasingly plausible.
Yeah, this report really underscores the very real vulnerabilities within our critical infrastructure vulnerabilities that could have a ripple effect on all of us. We're talking widespread damage, economic losses, even the potential for physical harm. Exactly. And while I consider myself, fairly tech savvy, this report got pretty dense pretty quickly. But what really struck me even before diving into, all of technical jargon was the sheer scope of it all. We're talking about 6 different automatic tank gauge systems, ATGs for short, from 5 different manufacturers.
Right.
That's a lot of systems.
And what's concerning is that many of these systems are interconnected. Take those ATGs you mentioned. They're not just at your local gas station. They're used in hospitals, airports, even military bases, all places where a disruption could have significant consequences.
Okay, so let's unpack these ATGs a bit.
Hmm?
They're essentially sensor systems that monitor fuel levels.
Right. They keep track of how much fuel is being stored, how much
Right.
is being dispensed, and that kind of thing.
And the report mentioned something about thousands of these things being exposed online. That's not good.
It's a major concern. This exposure opens the door for hackers to remotely access these systems
Yeah.
and, well, you can imagine the havoc they could wreak. We're talking manipulated readings leading to fuel shortages, or even worse, attacks that could cause physical damage to the equipment.
So like a real life action movie scenario.
Unfortunately, yes. And we're not just talking hypotheticals here. The report specifically identifies CVE 2024-45066 and CVE 2024-43693, both with a severity score of 10 out of 10. These vulnerabilities could allow attackers to inject malicious commands and potentially gain complete control of these ATGs.
Okay, a 10 out of 10 severity score sounds pretty alarming. What exactly does that mean for, say, the average person filling up their tank? What's the real world impact here?
Imagine this. You're driving down the highway and suddenly every gas station you pass is closed. Out of fuel. Panic sets in as drivers start competing for the few remaining gallons. That's just one scenario that could play out if hackers exploit these ATG vulnerabilities.
Wow. Okay, so not just inconvenience at the pump, but like potential chaos. I see why this report flagged these ATG vulnerabilities as such a big deal. But the ATGs were just the first thing on a long list, right? What other critical systems are we talking about here?
That's right. The ATGs are just one piece of the puzzle. This report also dives into vulnerabilities found in other essential systems. For instance, it highlights OpenPLC, a type of software used in all sorts of industrial applications, from manufacturing plants to traffic control systems.
Okay, so if someone hacked into OpenPLC, we're talking about potential disruptions on a much larger scale.
Potentially, yeah. The report specifically mentions a critical vulnerability, CVE 2024-34026. It's a stack-based buffer overflow, and hackers could exploit this flaw to execute code remotely. Essentially, they can take control of systems that rely on OpenPLC. Imagine a hacker disrupting a power grid or shutting down a factory. It's a sobering thought.
And this vulnerability received a 9 out of 10 on the severity scale. Clearly not something to be taken lightly. The report also mentioned real UPS systems, if I remember correctly. Those are the power backups that keep things running during outages, right?
Exactly, and they're crucial for critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
Hospitals, data centers, even traffic lights rely on these UPS systems to maintain essential functions during power failures. But unfortunately, the report found 2 major vulnerabilities in the Riela Netman 204 network card, which act as the communication hub for these systems.
Oh, so like the brains of the operation.
Essentially, yes. One vulnerability, CVE 2024-8877, involves SQL injection, a common but potentially dangerous attack that could let hackers mess with the beta logs. The other, CVE 2024-8878, is even more concerning. It could allow someone to reset the password without any authentication.
So someone could lock out authorized users and completely disable the power backup system. That's terrifying, especially for places like hospitals.
Exactly. And without accurate logs, imagine trying to diagnose a problem after an attack. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. What's more, these Riello vulnerabilities are still unpatched, meaning anyone using these systems in a critical environment is potentially at risk.
It's starting to feel like everything's vulnerable. The report didn't just stop at industrial systems, did it? It also mentioned something about home security cameras. That feels a bit too close to home, literally.
Yes, the report found vulnerabilities in home security cameras that use the AJ Cloud platform. These flaws could allow hackers to expose your personal data and even take control of your cameras.
So much for feeling safe at home.
It is unsettling. It's a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, cybersecurity is no longer just a concern for governments and large organizations. It's something we all need to be thinking about.
Right, these vulnerabilities affect all of us. And speaking of large organizations, the report mentioned a warning from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They've been seeing an increase in attacks targeting operational technology and industrial control systems.
Yes, OT and ICS, essentially the systems that run our power grids, water treatment plants, and other essential services. They are very attractive targets for hackers looking to cause widespread disruption.
And what's alarming is the report said these attacks aren't using new sophisticated techniques. It's often basic stuff like default credentials and brute force attacks, stuff we've known about for years. It begs the question, why haven't we gotten better at protecting these systems?
That's the million-dollar question. And one of the key takeaways from this report is that we can't just rely on technology. There needs to be a greater emphasis on basic security hygiene, both from individuals and organizations.
It's like we're stuck in this constant cycle of vulnerability patching and exploit discovery. It can feel a bit like playing whack-a-mole, can't it?
You're not wrong. But the Unitronics case study mentioned in the report provides a perfect example of why this basic security hygiene is so important. Unitronics makes PLCs, those industrial controllers we talked about earlier, and back in February, several Iranian officials were sanctioned for targeting these systems in various attacks. What's striking is that they weren't using any, cutting-edge hacking techniques. They were exploiting the fact that many of these PLCs were still using default passwords.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's almost unbelievable that in 2024, we're still talking about default passwords as a major vulnerability. You'd think by now that would be cybersecurity 101.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? This case just goes to show that even with all the advancements in cybersecurity technology, basic security hygiene is still absolutely paramount. It's like leaving your front door unlocked. It doesn't matter how strong your other security measures are if you're giving attackers an easy way in.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So, beyond just strong passwords, what else can be done? The report mentioned something about a more holistic approach. Security hygiene was the term, I think.
Precisely. It's about moving beyond a reactive approach of simply patching vulnerabilities as they pop up. Organizations need to proactively build security into every level of their operations. It's about implementing strong password policies, enforcing multi-factor authentication wherever possible, and being very careful about who has access to critical systems.
So it's a multi-layered approach. Strong defenses, but also a plan in place if someone does manage to breach the walls. One thing that really stood out to me in the report was the sheer number of remote access tools being used in these critical environments. The report stated that 55% of organizations have 4 or more. I don't even have 4 remote access tools on my personal laptop, and I'm a bit of a tech geek.
It's definitely a red flag.
Ah,
Each additional tool represents another potential entry point for attackers. Organizations need to be much more strategic about their use of these tools, particularly those with known vulnerabilities. The report specifically calls out Clarity, a cybersecurity firm, for recommending minimizing the use of less secure remote access tools.
it's like leaving multiple windows open in your house and wondering why you suddenly have a fly problem.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's not just about preventing attacks, but also minimizing the damage if an attack does occur. The report highlights the need for better forensic capabilities, essentially, the tools and techniques used to investigate cyber attacks after they happen. Thankfully, there are companies like Clarity working on this. They've actually released open-source tools designed to help extract forensic data from devices like those Unitronics PLCs.
So it's like having a security camera that also records who stole your TV and what they were wearing. Good for catching the bad guys after the fact, but it doesn't bring back the TV.
Exactly. But it does help you understand how the breach happened so you can prevent it from happening again. It all comes back to that layered approach to security.
So where does this leave us? It feels like we've uncovered a whole nest of cybersecurity threats, from vulnerable gas stations to hackable home security cameras. It's enough to make you want to unplug from the grid entirely.
It's certainly eye-opening, isn't it? But I think it's important to remember that while these threats are serious, they're not insurmountable. There are steps both individuals and organizations can take to protect themselves. Strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, limiting remote access. These are all things we've been hearing about for years. It's time we start taking them seriously.
Absolutely. We can't just bury our heads in the sand and hope these problems go away. Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility.
Well said. And as our world becomes increasingly reliant on interconnected systems, the lines between the digital world and the physical world continue to blur. We need to ask ourselves, are we sacrificing security in our quest for convenience? And if so, what are we willing to do about it?
That's a question we all need to consider. Well, on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to digest today. Remember,
Yeah.
knowledge is power when it comes to cybersecurity. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there.